The late afternoon sun beat down merciless on the dusty main street of Dry Creek, Wyoming territory. Heat waves shimmered off the hard-packed earth, making the ramshackle buildings dance like mirages. Ethan McKenna squinted against the glare, tasting alkali dust with every breath as he guided his tired gelding toward the livery stable. 3 months of driving cattle up from Texas had left him lean as rawhide, his clothes stiff with sweat and trail dirt. The promise of a real bed and whiskey that didn't taste like horse sweat had kept him going these last 50 miles. Now, as he swung down from the saddle, his boots hitting ground with a solid thud, all he wanted was to wash the grit from his throat and find work that didn't involve staring at the south end of northbound Longhorns. 2 bits a night, grains extra, the hostler said without looking up from the harness he was mending. You planning on staying long? Long as it takes to find honest work, Ethan replied, fishing coins from his vest pocket. His fingers found more lint than silver. The hostler finally glanced up, taking in Ethan's weathered face and trail-worn gear. Might try the Wheelin' spread, about 5 miles north. Heard tell they're looking for hands. Tom Whelan runs a fair outfit, though. He paused, spat tobacco juice into the dust. Well, you'll see for yourself. I reckon. Ethan nodded his thanks and headed for the saloon across the street. The broken spoke looked like every other watering hole from Amarillo to Cheyenne, unpainted boards weathered gray, bat-wing doors hanging crooked, and the sour smell of spilled beer mixing with tobacco smoke. But after 3 months of campfire coffee and jerky, it might as well have been the Waldorf Hotel. Inside, the blessed shade cooled his sun-scorched skin. A dozen men lined the bar or hunched over cards at scarred tables. Conversation hummed low, punctuated by the clink of glasses and scrape of chairs. Ethan found an empty spot at the bar and nodded to the bartender. Whiskey. Whatever's cheapest. The bartender, a mountain of a man with arms like ham hocks, poured amber liquid into a cloudy glass. That'll be your rot gut special. Strip paint off a fence post, but it'll cut the dust. Ethan tossed back the shot, feeling it burn a trail to his empty stomach. He'd had worse. The hostler mentioned the Whelan place might be hiring. A cowboy next to him snorted. Oh, they're hiring all right. Can't keep hands more than a month or 2. Bad outfit? Ethan asked. Though he couldn't afford to be choosy, his last dollar wouldn't last the week. Nah, Tom Whelan's fair as they come. Good land, decent pay. The cowboy signaled for another drink. It's the women folk cause all the trouble. Another man down the bar laughed. Trouble, that's one way of putting it. That Clara Whelan could make a preacher forget his vows. Prettiest thing this side of Denver, and she knows it. Pretty is as pretty does. The first cowboy muttered into his glass. She's got half the men in the county twisted around her little finger, playing them against each other like a cat with mice. The bartender leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Then there's the other one, the widow. Abigail, someone supplied. The one no cowboy wants. Ethan's curiosity stirred despite himself. What's wrong with her? Nothing's wrong with her, exactly, the bartender said, polishing a glass with a grimy rag. She's just, well, she ain't Clara. Plain as a fence post. That one. Keeps to herself mostly. Got a boy, 2, husband, died of fever couple years back. Heard she's got a tongue sharp enough to skin a buffalo. Another voice chimed in. Won't take no nonsense from any man. Can't blame her for that. The first cowboy said, living in her pretty sister's shadow. Forgotten by everyone. Must be a hard row to hoe. Ethan ordered another whiskey, this time nursing it slow. He'd seen plenty of pretty women cause trouble in cow towns from here to Mexico. But a job was a job. And if Tom Whelan ran a fair outfit, that's all that mattered. Pretty sisters and plain widows were none of his concern. By the time he'd finished his 3rd whiskey, the sun had started its slide toward the mountains, painting the sky the color of a fresh bruise. Ethan settled his bill and stepped back into the street, breathing deep of the cooling air. The town was stirring to life as the heat-broke women emerged to tend their kitchen gardens. Children chased chickens between the buildings, and more cowboys drifted toward the saloon. He found a boarding house that looked slightly less likely to collapse than the others, paid for a night, and washed the worst of the trail from his face and hands in the basin provided. His reflection in the cracked mirror showed a man past 30, face weathered by sun and wind, gray already threading through his dark hair. Not much to offer any woman, pretty or plain. But he wasn't looking for a woman. He was looking for work. Morning came too soon, announced by a rooster that seemed to be crowing directly outside his window. Ethan rolled out of the narrow bed, joints protesting after months of sleeping on hard ground. He'd grown soft, letting himself enjoy even one night of relative comfort. After a breakfast of biscuits, hard enough to drive nails, and coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, he saddled up and headed north, following the hostler's directions. The road wound between low hills dotted with sage and juniper, the air still cool and sweet before the day's heat took hold. The wheelin' spread announced itself with good fences and fat cattle grazing in the distance. The main house sat on a rise, a 2-story frame building with a wide porch and real glass windows, signs of prosperity in this hard country. Barns and outbuildings clustered nearby, all in good repair. Ethan approached the house, noting the vegetable garden to one side, rows of corn and beans growing straight and green despite the dry season. Someone here knew how to coax life from unforgiving soil. He dismounted at the hitching post and had barely set foot on the porch steps when the front door opened. The woman who emerged made him understand why cowboys rode 5 miles out of their way to moon around the Whelan place. Clara Whelan was everything they'd said and more. Golden hair pinned up to show a graceful neck, blue eyes bright as a mountain lake, and a figure that did justice to her store-bought dress. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her welcome anywhere. "Well," she said, voice like honey over warm biscuits, "you don't look like our usual run of callers. Let me guess, you've come about the job?" "Yes, ma'am. Name's Ethan McKenna. I heard your father might be looking for hands." Her smile could have melted iron. "How fortunate. Daddy's out with the herd, but he'll be back for noon dinner." "You're welcome to wait." She glanced past him to his horse. "You can water your horse at the trough. I'll have someone take care of him." "I can tend him myself, ma'am. No need to trouble anyone." "Nonsense." She turned toward the door. "Abigail, we have a visitor." The woman who appeared in the doorway was everything Clara wasn't, where Clara shone golden. Abigail was dark brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, brown eyes that studied him with quiet assessment. Her dress was practical homespun, faded from washing, and she wore an apron that had seen better days. Not ugly, Ethan thought, but worn down like a river stone, all the sharp edges smoothed away by hardship. "This is Mr. McKenna," Clara announced. "He's come about the job. Would you see to his horse?" Something flickered in Abigail's eyes. Annoyance, maybe, at being ordered about like hired help in her own home, but she merely nodded. "I'll have Jimmy take care of it." Her voice surprised him, low and steady, without the music of Clara's words, but with a strength that spoke of backbone. She disappeared back inside, and moments later a boy of maybe 8 years appeared, all knees and elbows and serious expression. "I'll take good care of him, mister," the boy said solemnly, taking the reins. "Much obliged," Ethan replied, noting how the child handled the horse with easy competence. Someone had taught him well. Clara led him to the porch, gesturing to a rocking chair. "Please, sit. I'll bring you something cool to drink. This heat is just dreadful, isn't it?" Before he could respond, she'd swept back inside, leaving him to study the view. It was good land, no doubt about it. Water rights to the creek that gave the town its name. Good grass, sheltered from the worst of the winter winds. A man could build something here. The door opened again, but it was Abigail who emerged. carrying a tray with glasses and a pitcher beaded with moisture. She set it on the small table between the chairs with movements that spoke of long practice. "Lemonade," she said simply. "Clara's freshening up." "Thank you, ma'am." He accepted the glass gratefully, the tart sweetness washing away the last of the trail dust. "Fine place you have here. My father's built it up over 20 years. She remained standing, one hand resting on the porch rail. "You been cowboying long, Mr. McKenna?" "Since I was old enough to stick on a horse. Just finished a drive up from Texas. Planning on staying in Wyoming, or just passing through?" It was the kind of practical question a ranch woman would ask. No point hiring someone who'd light out at the first snowfall. "Depends on what I find. I'm not one for moving on without reason." She nodded, apparently satisfied. "We've lost 3 hands in the last month. The work's hard but honest. Daddy pays fair wages. And the bunkhouse is sound. You'll eat at the main house Sundays. Bunkhouse cook the rest of the week." "Why'd the others leave, if you don't mind my asking?" That flicker in her eyes again. "I expect they had their reasons." She glanced toward the door. "If you'll excuse me, I need to see about dinner." She left him to his lemonade and his thoughts. The boy had brought his horse to the shade of a cottonwood, was brushing him down with careful strokes. Good stock here, both 4-legged and 2-legged, even if the pretty sister did seem to run the plain one like a servant. Clara reappeared, having changed into an even finer dress, her hair now adorned with ribbons. The effect was wasted on a travel-worn cowboy, but Ethan figured she was the type who'd dress up for a scarecrow if it was the only audience available. For the next hour, she kept up a stream of bright chatter about the hardships of frontier life, the shocking behavior of the town ladies, the tragedy of being so far from proper society. Ethan made appropriate noises when required, but his attention kept drifting to the window where he could see Abigail in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up as she worked over the stove, efficient and purposeful. When the noon hour approached, riders appeared from the north, dust cloud announcing their arrival. Tom Whelan proved to be a solid man in his 50s, face weathered but kind, handshake firm. He asked practical questions about Ethan's experience, nodded at the answers. "We can use a man who knows his business," he said finally. $1 a day and found half-day Sundays. You can start tomorrow if that suits." They shook on it, and Ethan was invited to stay for dinner. The meal was a revelation after months of trail food roast beef, fresh vegetables from that garden, bread that melted on the tongue. Clara held court at one end of the table, her father at the other, while Abigail and the boy, Jimmy, her son, sat quietly in between. The conversation flowed around ranch business, town gossip, the weather. Ethan noticed how Abigail said little unless directly asked, how she made sure everyone else was served before filling her own plate, how her eyes followed her son with quiet pride when he remembered his manners. "Mr. McKenna's been up from Texas," Clara announced, as if this was news. "How exciting that must have been. Tell us about the wild towns along the way." But it was Abigail who asked, "Did you have trouble with the rivers being high this year? We heard the Red was running bank to bank." Grateful for a practical topic, Ethan told them about the crossing, how they'd lost a wagon and nearly lost 2 men. Tom Whelan asked keen questions about the trail conditions, beef prices in Kansas, the mood of the tribes they'd encountered. Real rancher questions, the kind that mattered. As the meal ended and Ethan prepared to head to the bunkhouse, he caught Abigail alone for a moment on the porch. "Thank you for the fine meal, ma'am. Best I've had in longer than I can remember." She looked surprised, as if compliments were foreign currency in her world. "You're welcome, Mr. McKenna. I hope you'll find the work to your liking." He touched his hat and turned to go, then looked back. "Your boy, he's got a good hand with horses. You've taught him well." This time her smile was real, transforming her face entirely. "His father's doing, mostly, but thank you for saying so." Walking to the bunkhouse, Ethan reflected on the warnings he'd received in town. Yes, Clara Whelan was pretty enough to cause trouble, the kind of woman who collected men's hearts like trophies. But it was the other one, the widow no cowboy wanted, who lingered in his mind. Plain as a fence post? Maybe. But fence posts held up the fences that kept the ranch together. There was something to be said for that. Tomorrow he'd start earning his wages, learning the rhythms of this new place. And if Clara wanted to practice her wiles on him, well, he'd face down stampedes and Comanche raiding parties. One pretty girl shouldn't be too much trouble. But as he settled into his bunk, listening to the snores of the other hands, it was Abigail's quiet strength he remembered, and the way her face had lit up when he'd praised her son. The widow no cowboy wanted. He wondered if any of them had bothered to look past Clara's shine to see what they were missing. The first week at the Whelan Ranch taught Ethan why they'd lost 3 hands in a month. Not from the work, though it was hard enough, mending fences and moving cattle to fresh pasture, but from the peculiar dance that played out at the main house each Sunday. Clara Whelan collected admirers like some women collected ribbons. By his count, she had 6 cowboys from neighboring spreads riding over on any excuse. Plus the 2 remaining hands besides himself who'd go tongue-tied and foolish whenever she appeared. She played them all with the skill of a card sharp, dealing out smiles and frowns to keep them hoping and competing. That first Sunday dinner became a lesson in watching grown men make fools of themselves. Jake Morrison from the Double Bar Ranch brought Clara flowers half-wilted wildflowers that she accepted as if they were roses from Denver. Pete Hawkins, one of the hands who'd been there longest, kept trying to catch her eye with stories that grew taller with each telling. Through it all, Abigail moved quiet as a shadow, serving food, clearing plates, making sure everyone had what they needed. The boy Jimmy helped, carrying what he could manage, sneaking glances at the cowboys like he was trying to puzzle out why they acted so strange. "Mrs. Ross," Ethan said when she refilled his coffee, using her married name as was proper. "This roast beats anything I've had since St. Louis." She paused, coffee pot in hand. Most of the men addressed only Clara, as if Abigail was furniture. "Thank you, Mr. McKenna, though I suspect you're being generous. Trail cooking tends to make anything else taste fine." "No, ma'am, credit where it's due. That's proper cooking." Clara's voice cut across the conversation. "Abigail's always been practical about such things. Some of us appreciate finer pursuits." She held up a book of poetry Jake had brought her, though Ethan doubted she'd read past the inscription. The meal continued, tension thick as winter molasses. Tom Whelan seemed oblivious, discussing cattle prices with the steadier heads, but Ethan caught the tightness around Abigail's mouth, the way her knuckles whitened when she gripped the serving spoon. After dinner, the men gathered on the porch while Clara held court in the rocking chair. Ethan excused himself, claiming need to check on a colicky horse. Instead, he found himself at the kitchen's back door, where Abigail was elbow-deep in dishwater while Jimmy dried. "Let me help with those," he offered. She looked up, startled. "That's not necessary, Mr. McKenna. You should be resting on your half-day. Work goes faster with 3. He'd already rolled up his sleeves, taking a dish towel from the rack. "Your boy and I can dry while you wash." Jimmy glanced at his mother, who gave a small nod. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the kitchen warm with steam and the lingering smells of dinner. "You don't have to do this," Abigail said quietly. "I know the others are wondering where you've gone." "Let them wonder. I've seen enough peacock displays for one day." A smile ghosted across her face. "That's one way of putting it." "Mama says Aunt Clara's pretty makes men act funny." Jimmy piped up, then reddened. "Sorry, Mama." "No harm in truth, son." Abigail handed Ethan another plate. "Though we should be charitable, Clara can't help how she was born any more than the rest of us." There was no bitterness in her voice, just matter-of-fact acceptance. Ethan wondered at that. Most women would resent a sister who drew all eyes while they did all the work. Still, he said, seems unfair. You doing all this while she entertains. Life's rarely fair, Mr. McKenna. We make do with what we're given. They finished the dishes, Jimmy chattering about the horses, asking Ethan about the trail, eyes bright with curiosity. The boy was smart, quick to understand when Ethan explained about reading weather signs or judging a river crossing. Can you show me sometime? Jimmy asked. About the weather signs. If your mother approves. Abigail's hand stilled in the act of wiping down the table. That's kind of you, Mr. McKenna, but I wouldn't want to impose on your time. No imposition. Boys should learn such things. She studied him with those quiet brown eyes, seeming to weigh his words for any hidden meaning. Finding none, she nodded. After his chores, then, and Jimmy, what do you say? Thank you, sir. The boy's grin could have powered a lighthouse. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Days were for work hard, honest labor under the wide sky. Tom Whelan proved a fair boss, knowledgeable about his land and stock, treating his hands with respect. Ethan found himself settling into the rhythm, learning which horses had temperament, which sections of fence needed constant attention, where the cattle liked to drift when storms approached. Evenings in the bunkhouse were for cards and tall tales. Though Ethan noticed the other hand spent considerable time discussing Clara's every word and gesture, analyzing them like prospectors looking for gold sign. She smiled at me special today, Pete would say, when I brought in that stray calf. That weren't nothing. Jake would counter on his visits. She said my new boots were very handsome. That's practically a declaration. Ethan kept his own counsel, though privately he thought they were all chasing smoke. Clara Whelan enjoyed the attention too much to choose any of them. Why settle for one when she could have a dozen dancing attendants? Sundays became a trial. More men appeared each week, drawn by Clara's reputation. The dinner table grew crowded, the competition more obvious. Tom Whelan started looking concerned, especially after two cowboys nearly came to blows over who'd sit nearest Clara. Through it all, Abigail worked. Cooking for that many took skill and planning, but she managed it without complaint. Ethan took to arriving early, helping where he could despite her protests. You're a guest on Sundays. She'd say, you shouldn't be working. Neither should you, by that logic. He'd reply and continue peeling potatoes or hauling water. Jimmy often joined them, eager to help and to hear Ethan's stories. The boy was starved for male attention. Ethan realized his father's death had left a gap that no amount of mother's love could fill. One Sunday, a month into his employment, the situation reached a head. Clara appeared at dinner in a new dress store bought from Denver, blue as her eyes, with more ribbons and lace than was practical for ranch country. The effect on her admirers was immediate and dramatic. Jake Morrison stood so fast he knocked over his chair. Pete Hawkins started stammering compliments. Even Steady Ben Rodriguez, the ranch foreman, seemed struck dumb. Clara preened under the attention, playing with her fan, letting her laugh tinkle like crystal bells. Isn't it divine? She said to the table at large. Daddy brought it back from his trip. Though really, what occasion will I have to wear it properly in this wilderness? You'd grace any ballroom in San Francisco. Jake managed. Denver society would be lucky to have you, Pete added, not to be outdone. The competitive compliments flew thick and fast. Ethan caught Tom Whelan's frown, saw how the older man's jaw tightened. This was disrupting his ranch, his peace. But what could a father do? Abigail served the meal in silence, her face carefully neutral. But Ethan saw the tension in her shoulders, the precise movements that spoke of held-back frustration. When she reached for his empty plate, their hands brushed, and he felt the tremor in her fingers. Gentlemen, Tom Whelan said finally, voice cutting through the chatter. I appreciate you all coming to Sunday dinner, but I need to speak plain. This ranch runs on work and cooperation. I can't have my hands or my neighbors fighting over foolishness. Clara's eyes went wide with practiced innocence.
Daddy, surely you're not suggesting…
I'm suggesting nothing. Girl, I'm saying outright that this needs to stop. You're welcome to Sunday dinners, all of you, but I'll have peace at my table. An uncomfortable silence fell. Jake Morrison pushed back his chair. Maybe I should go. No need. Tom said, just remember why we're here. Good food, good company, good conversation, nothing more. The meal continued, subdued now. Clara pouted prettily, but even she seemed to recognize she'd pushed too far. When dinner ended, the men dispersed quickly, muttering excuses about chores and early mornings. Ethan lingered, helping clear the table despite Abigail's protests. In the kitchen, with Jimmy sent to gather eggs, she finally spoke. You didn't compete for her attention. No, ma'am. Why not? Most men can't resist when she turns on the charm. He considered his words carefully. My mother used to say that still water runs deep. All that sparkle on the surface usually means there's not much underneath. Abigail's hands paused in their washing. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She raised 6 boys, mostly on her own after Pa died. Taught us to look past the surface of things. A valuable lesson. She resumed washing, but he caught the slight ease in her shoulders. Mr. McKenna, can I ask you something? Of course. Why do you help with these dishes? True answer now, not politeness. He dried the plate in his hands slowly, thinking, true answer. This kitchen feels more honest than that dining room. You and Jimmy, you're real. No games, no pretense. Just good people doing what needs doing. Man gets tired of watching theater every Sunday. She turned to look at him then, really look at him, and he saw surprise in her brown eyes. That's not what I expected. What did you expect? That you were biding time, maybe being kind to the Plain sister to get closer to Clara. It wouldn't be the first time. The words came out bitter, and he realized this was an old wound. Mrs. Ross, I'll be plain with you. Your sister is beautiful, no denying it, but I've known horses with more depth. You, though, he paused, choosing his words. You keep this place running. You're raising a fine boy. You face each day with dignity despite how things are. That's worth more than all the ribbons and lace in Denver. Color rose in her cheeks, and she turned back to the dishes. Mr. McKenna, I don't need pity. Not offering any, just stating facts as I see them. They finished the dishes in silence, but it was a different quality of quiet now. Something had shifted. Some wall had cracked when Jimmy returned with the eggs, chattering about the rooster that had chased him. The tension eased further. Mr. McKenna promised to teach me about weather signs. Mama, the boy said, can he start today? If Mr. McKenna has time, Abigail said carefully. Time enough. Ethan ruffled the boy's hair. Get your jacket. Evening's cooling off. They spent an hour in the yard, Ethan pointing out cloud formations, explaining how wind patterns shifted before storms, why the cattle bunched certain ways when weather approached. Jimmy absorbed it all, asking smart questions, making connections. Abigail watched from the kitchen door, and when Ethan glanced her way, he caught something soft in her expression, not the calculated interest Clara deployed, but something genuine and unguarded. When full dark approached, Ethan headed for the bunkhouse. At the door, Abigail called after him. Mr. McKenna. Thank you. For Jimmy. It's been hard since his father died. He misses having a man to learn from. Boy's got a good head on his shoulders. Be a pleasure to teach him what I can. She nodded, wrapped her shawl tighter against the evening chill. And thank you for what you said earlier. It's been a long time since anyone saw past. Well, just thank you. He touched his hat. Ma'am. Walking to the bunkhouse under a sky thick with stars. Ethan reflected on the evening. He'd been at the ranch a month, and for the first time, it felt like he might have found more than just a job. In the bunkhouse, Pete was holding forth about Clara's new dress, how she'd looked at him special when she'd twirled to show it off. Ethan let the talk wash over him, thinking instead of capable hands in dishwater, of a boy eager to learn, of quiet strength that asked for no recognition. The widow no Cowboy wanted. They were fools, the lot of them. But their foolishness was his gain. Let them chase after Clara's sparkle. He'd found something better, something real and solid and true. Tomorrow would bring more work, more of Clara's games, more of the dance that kept the ranch unsettled, but there would also be Jimmy's eager questions, Abigail's quiet competence, the satisfaction of honest labor under an endless sky. For the first time in years of drifting, Ethan McKenna thought he might have found a reason to stay put. The second Sunday in August brought thunderheads building over the mountains, purple, black, and heavy with threat. Ethan watched them through dinner, noting how the air had gone still and thick, how the horses in the corral moved restless despite the heat. "Storm coming," he mentioned to Tom Whelan as Abigail served the roast. "Big one, by the look of it." The older man nodded, following his gaze out the window. "We get some powerful blows this time of year, that new section of fence ready to hold?" "Should be. Ben and I reinforced the posts yesterday." Clara, resplendent in yellow silk that matched nothing in the landscape, waved her fan dismissively. "Oh, you men and your weather talk. Surely it's just a little rain. The flowers need it desperately." Jake Morrison, who'd never missed a Sunday dinner since Ethan arrived, rushed to agree. Miss Clara's right, probably blow over by nightfall. Ethan held his tongue, but he caught Abigail's eye as she set down the gravy boat. She'd lived here long enough to read the signs, too. There was worry in the quick glance she gave the windows. The meal progressed with its usual undercurrents. Clara holding court, her admirers jockeying for position. Tom Whelan growing increasingly stern as Pete and Jake sniped at each other over who'd complimented Clara's dress first. But Ethan found himself distracted by the changing light, the way the temperature seemed to drop between one breath and the next. Jimmy fidgeted in his seat, picking up on the adult's tension. "Mama, is it gonna storm bad?" "We'll manage whatever comes," Abigail said calmly, but her hand rested briefly on his shoulder, reassuring. By the time they reached dessert, Abigail's peach cobbler that had the men momentarily forgetting Clara in their appreciation, the first fat raindrops were hitting the windows. Thunder rolled across the valley like giant boulders tumbling down a mountainside. "I should go," Jake said reluctantly, eyeing the darkening sky. "Don't want to get caught in this." "Nonsense," Clara declared. "You can wait it out here, can't they, Daddy?" Tom Whelan stood, moving to the window. What he saw made his face tighten. "No, Jake's right. Anyone not staying here needs to ride out now before it gets worse. This has the look of a real tempest." The visiting cowboys grumbled but gathered their hats and made for the door. Through the window, Ethan saw them racing for their horses as the rain began in earnest. Within minutes, the world outside had become a gray curtain of water. "Well," Clara said, pouting at her depleted audience. "How tedious. Now we're trapped inside with nothing to do." A massive crack of thunder shook the house, rattling dishes in the sideboard. The wind picked up, howling around the eaves like a living thing. Jimmy pressed closer to his mother. "I need to check the stock," Tom said, reaching for his oilskin. "Ben, Pete, you're with me. Ethan, can you—" "I'll secure the barn and check the chicken coop," Ethan said, already moving. "That roof was looking questionable last week." "Mama, I want to help," Jimmy said, but Abigail shook her head. "Not in this, sweetheart. The men will handle it." Clara had gone pale as another thunderclap seemed to shake the foundation. "Surely you're not going out in this. It's dangerous." "Stock doesn't care about storms," her father said grimly. "They need tending regardless." The men scattered into the tempest. Ethan pulled his hat low and plunged into what felt like a solid wall of water. The wind tried to tear him off his feet, and he could barely see 10 feet ahead. By the time he reached the barn, he was soaked through. The horses were wild-eyed with fear, whinnying and kicking at their stalls. He spent precious minutes calming them, checking that the doors were secure against the wind. The chicken coop was worse. Half the roof had already torn loose, and the birds were in full panic. He did what he could, wrestling the loose boards back into place, but the wind fought him for every nail. His hands were numb, rain driving into his face like buckshot. Above it all, the thunder crashed and rolled, lightning turning the world white and black in terrifying strobes. Making his way back to the house, he nearly stumbled over something in the yard, peering through the rain. He realized it was lumber from the wood pile, scattered like matchsticks, if that was flying around. He burst through the kitchen door to find Abigail alone, securing shutters and checking supplies. "Where's Jimmy?"
Upstairs with Clara. She's frightened of storms.
There was no judgment in her voice, just fact.
How bad is it?
Bad. Chicken coop's half gone. This wind keeps up. We'll lose more than that. He grabbed a towel from the rack, wiping rain from his face. "You have a root cellar." "Yes, but—" Her eyes widened in understanding.
You think it's that serious?
Another crash from outside answered her. "Through the window, they saw a piece of fence sail past like a child's toy." "Get Jimmy and Clara," Ethan said. "I'll gather what supplies I can." She didn't argue, just hiked up her skirts and ran for the stairs. Ethan grabbed what he could carry: water, blankets, the oil lamp from the kitchen table. The house groaned around them, wood protesting the assault. Abigail reappeared with Jimmy clutched to her side and Clara trailing behind, complaining. "This is absurd. We're perfectly safe in the house. I won't go down into that musty old—" The window in the dining room exploded inward, wind and rain howling through the breach like demons. Clara screamed. Jimmy pressed his face into his mother's shoulder. "Move!" Ethan shouted over the storm. They stumbled out the back door, Ethan shielding them as best he could as they fought their way to the cellar. The door nearly tore from his hands when he opened it. He half-carried Clara down the steps while Abigail managed Jimmy, then pulled the door shut behind them, plunging them into darkness until Abigail lit the lamp. The cellar was small, musty as Clara had said, but solid. Root vegetables lined the walls in bins, preserves on rough shelves. The storm's fury was muffled here, though they could still feel the earth shake with the worst of the thunder. Clara huddled on a crate, silk dress already showing water stains and mud.
"This is intolerable. When Daddy hears about this—"
"Your daddy's got bigger worries than your dress," Ethan said sharply. "He's out trying to save the livestock that keep this ranch running." She fell silent, looking small and miserable in the lamplight. Jimmy clung to his mother, trying to be brave but jumping with each crash of thunder. Abigail held him close, murmuring comfort.
"Mr.
McKenna," Jimmy whispered.
"Are the horses going to be okay?"
"Horses are smart. Son, they know how to weather a storm. Your grandpa and the others will make sure they're safe." Time crawled in the cellar. The lamp flickered, making shadows dance on the walls. Clara sniffled occasionally but had stopped complaining. Ethan found himself watching Abigail, the calm way she stroked Jimmy's hair, the steady strength in her posture despite everything. "Thank you," she said quietly when Jimmy had dozed off against her shoulder, "for getting us down here. I wouldn't have thought of it in time." "You would have. You're not one to panic." A particularly vicious gust shook the cellar door, and Clara whimpered.
"What if the house is gone? What if we're trapped?"
"House has stood 20 years, Abigail said. "It'll stand tonight, and the men know we're here." But Ethan could see the worry she tried to hide. If the worst happened, if Tom and the others were injured or worse— "I used to be afraid of storms," he said, partly to fill the silence, partly to distract them. Back in Missouri when I was young, my mother would gather all us boys in the kitchen, tell stories to keep our minds off the weather.
What kind of stories? Jimmy asked sleepily. Oh, all kinds. Bible stories, fairy tales, family history. She had a gift for it.
Tell us one, Clara said suddenly. It was the first time Ethan had heard her speak without artifice, just a frightened girl wanting comfort. So he did. He told them about his great-uncle who'd fought in the Revolution, about the time his brothers had tried to ride the bull and ended up in the water trough, about his mother's apple pie that won the county fair 3 years running. His voice rough with memory. He painted pictures of a Missouri farm, of family gatherings, of simpler times before war and wandering. Abigail listened with that quiet attention she gave everything, occasionally adding a question that kept him talking. Even Clara seemed to forget her discomfort, drawn into the stories. The storm's fury gradually spent itself, thunder growing distant, wind dropping from a howl to a moan. When Ethan judged it safe, he ventured up to check. The door pushed open with difficulty. Debris had piled against it, but the world above still existed. The house stood, though wounded, windows broken, porch partially collapsed. Tom's carefully tended garden flattened, but the walls held, the roof mostly intact. "It's safe," he called down, "but watch your step." They emerged like survivors from a cave, blinking in the strange yellow light that follows storms. Destruction lay everywhere. Fence posts snapped like twigs, the chicken coop reduced to kindling, feed sacks torn open and scattered.
Oh,
Clara breathed, taking in the devastation.
oh no.
Tom Whelan and the others appeared around the corner of the house, muddy and exhausted, but whole. The relief on the older man's face when he saw them was profound. "Thank God," he said. "When we saw the windows." "Mr. McKenna got us to the cellar," Abigail said. "We're all fine." Tom gripped Ethan's shoulder. "I'm obliged to you, more than I can say." The rest of the day blurred into work, covering broken windows, salvaging what they could, tending injured animals. Clara, faced with real crisis, wilted like her yellow silk dress. She retreated to her room, claiming a headache, leaving the others to manage. But Abigail was everywhere, organizing, directing, her sleeves rolled up and her hair escaping its pins. She bandaged Ben's cut hand, made coffee for the exhausted men, kept Jimmy busy with small tasks to keep his mind off the destruction. As evening fell, they gathered in the kitchen, the dining room unusable with its broken window. Abigail had managed soup and cornbread despite the chaos, and they ate in weary silence. "It'll take weeks to fix all this," Tom said heavily. "Maybe months." "We'll manage," Ben said. "Always do."
I can help rebuild the coop,
Jimmy offered earnestly. "I'm good with a hammer." His grandfather smiled, the first lightness in his face since the storm. "I'll take you up on that, boy." Later, as Ethan helped board up the last window, Abigail brought him coffee. They stood together looking out at the wreckage in the fading light. "It could have been worse," she said. "Much worse. You handled it well. Jimmy, too." She sipped her own coffee, steam rising between them. "Clara didn't. She's young, hasn't faced much hardship." "Neither had I, at her age. But when life demands it, you learn to cope or you crumble." She glanced at him. "Those stories you told in the cellar, your family sounds wonderful." "They are those still living. Haven't seen them in too long." "Why did you leave?" He considered the question, surprised to find himself willing to answer. "Restlessness, I suppose. After the war, couldn't seem to settle. Kept thinking there was something out there I needed to find." "Did you find it?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. Hair mussed, dress stained with mud, face drawn with exhaustion, but steady as bedrock. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Starting to think maybe I did." She turned away, but not before he caught the color in her cheeks. There's still so much to do." Abigail. He rarely used her given name, but it felt right in this moment. What you did today, keeping everyone steady, making sure we all got fed despite everything, that matters. Don't know if anyone else will say it, but it matters. She stood very still for a moment. Thank you, Ethan. His name on her lips was soft as the evening breeze. That matters too. She went back inside, leaving him with the cooling coffee and the certainty that something fundamental had shifted, like the landscape after the storm. Different now, but maybe stronger for the testing. The stars came out, brilliant after the storm's washing of the air. Tomorrow would bring the hard work of rebuilding, but tonight, Ethan McKenna stood in the wreckage and felt more at home than he had in years. Not because of the land or the job or even the wild beauty of the Wyoming sky, but because of a woman who faced storms without flinching, who built quiet strength into everything she touched, who saw him not as another cowboy to charm, but as a man worth knowing. The widow no cowboy wanted. They were blind, every last one of them, but their blindness had become his blessing, and he'd guard that blessing as carefully as he'd guarded them from the storm. The weeks after the storm brought a different rhythm to the Whelan Ranch. With so much to rebuild, there was no time for Sunday dinner theatrics. Clara's admirers still came, but now they came to work, patching roofs, mending fences, clearing debris. Some grumbled, but most rose to the occasion, proving they were more than lovesick fools. It was during this time that Ethan noticed the change in how he and Abigail moved around each other. Small things, the way she'd bring him water without being asked when he worked on the chicken coop, how he'd split extra kindling because he knew she rose early to start the stove. They'd developed an understanding that needed no words. Jimmy had become his shadow whenever chores allowed, eager to learn everything from hammerwork to reading horse behavior. The boy was starved for knowledge, quick to grasp concepts that took grown men years to understand. Mr. McKenna, Jimmy said one afternoon as they worked on the new coop roof, why don't you ever moon over Aunt Clara like the others? Ethan nearly dropped his hammer. That's a bold question, son. Mama says I'm too direct sometimes. The boy didn't sound particularly sorry. But I've been wondering. Well, Ethan said carefully, your aunt's a fine lady, but she's not for me. Because you like Mama better. This time he did drop the hammer. Jimmy, I seen how you look at her, and how she looks at you when you ain't watching. The boy's face was earnest. I think it'd be good. You make her smile more. It's not that simple, son. Why not? You're here, she's here. You both work hard and don't complain. Seems simple to me. From the mouths of babes, Ethan thought. But the boy didn't understand the complications. Clara's likely fury, Tom's possible disapproval, the town's gossip, Abigail's own walls built from years of being second choice. The conversation haunted him through the week. He found himself watching Abigail more closely, catching moments he might have missed before, the way she hummed while kneading bread, how she'd pause to watch sunset paint the mountains, the gentle patience with which she helped Clara mend her storm-damaged dresses despite her sister's complaints. Clara had not taken well to the changes. With her audience diminished and everyone focused on work, she grew petulant. She'd appear at odd moments, dressed impractically, trying to recapture attention. Ethan, she called one morning, using his given name for the first time. Could you help me? This trunk is ever so heavy. He was mucking stalls, covered in sweat, and worse. Pete's closer to the house. Miss Clara. Ask him. But I'm asking you. She batted her eyelashes in a way that probably worked better when he wasn't holding a pitchfork full of manure. Then you'll need to wait until I'm finished here. She flounced off, and he heard her complaining to her father at lunch about how the help had grown insufferably rude since the storm. Tom just grunted and kept eating. It was Abigail who smoothed things over, as always. Clara's finding the changes hard, she said to Ethan later, bringing him coffee while he repaired harness. She's never had to share attention with anything as demanding as storm damage. She's had everything too easy, Ethan said bluntly. Perhaps, but that's not really her fault. Is it we all become what our circumstances make us? You didn't. She stilled, hands wrapped around her own cup. What do you mean? You could have grown bitter, widow with a child, overshadowed by your pretty sister, doing most of the work with little thanks. But you didn't. You grew strong instead. I had Jimmy to think of. That changes things. Some women would have used that as an excuse to be helpless. You used it as a reason to be capable. She looked at him then, something vulnerable in her eyes. Ethan, why do you say these things to me? Because they're true, and because I think you need to hear them. Before she could respond, Jimmy burst around the corner. Mama, mister, McKenna riders coming. Lots of them. They moved to where they could see the road. A group of horsemen approached, maybe a dozen, riding with purpose. Ethan didn't recognize them, but something in their bearing set his nerves on edge. Get inside, he told Abigail quietly. Take Jimmy. What's wrong? Maybe nothing, but get inside anyway. She didn't argue. Gathering Jimmy and heading for the house, Ethan moved to where Tom and Ben were standing, watching the riders approach. Know them? He asked. Tom shook his head, frowning. That's Sam Baylor in front, owns the Rocking Bee north of here, but I don't know why he'd bring so many men. The riders pulled up in the yard, dust swirling. Baylor was a hard-faced man in his 50s, prosperous by his clothes, cold by his eyes. Tom, he said without dismounting, heard you had some storm damage. We did, managing fine, though appreciate the concern. Also heard that pretty daughter of yours has been causing quite a stir. My boy Luke's been riding over here regular. Tom's face hardened. If you've got something to say, Sam, say it plain. Plain, then. Luke says he's been courting your Clara serious, but she's been playing him against other fellows. Leading them all on, that's gotta stop. My daughter can receive whatever callers she chooses. If Luke doesn't like the competition... It's not about competition, Baylor cut in. It's about a woman knowing her place. Time she chose someone and stopped causing trouble. Luke's willing to take her despite her flighty ways. Ethan felt his temper rise. Take her, like Clara was livestock to be claimed. Tom stepped forward. You'll speak respectfully about my daughter, Sam, or you'll leave my land. I'm trying to do this neighborly, Baylor said. But that girl needs a firm hand. Marriage would settle her down. Luke's prepared to offer for her. You'd be wise to accept. Clara will choose her own husband when she's ready. Baylor's smile was thin as wire. See, that's where we disagree. Sometimes a father needs to guide these decisions. For everyone's good. The implied threat hung in the air. The men with Baylor shifted slightly. Hands casual but ready. Ethan counted odds. Didn't like them. I think you should go, Tom said quietly. Think on it. Tom, we've been good neighbors for 15 years. Hate to see that change over a silly girl's games. Baylor touched his hat mockingly. Be seeing you. They rode off, leaving silence in their wake. Tom stood rigid, fists clenched. Bastard, Ben muttered. Acting like Clara's his to dispose of. He's not entirely wrong about one thing, Tom said heavily. Clara's games have gone too far. This kind of trouble. He shook his head. I need to think. At supper that night, tension filled the room. Tom had told Clara about Baylor's visit, and for once she seemed genuinely shaken. I don't even like Luke Baylor, she protested. He's coarse and grabby and smells like sheep. You've encouraged him same as the others, her father said sternly. Dancing with him, accepting his gifts. I was being polite. You were being vain. Tom's voice was harder than Ethan had ever heard it. And now it's brought trouble to our door. Clara burst into tears and fled the table. Abigail half rose to follow, but Tom waved her down.
Let her go. Maybe some hard thinking will do her good. The meal finished in uncomfortable silence. After, Ethan helped clear despite Abigail's protests that guests shouldn't work. "I'm not a guest," he said. "Haven't been for a while now." In the kitchen, with Jimmy sent to do homework, they worked side by side. "This is my fault too," Abigail said suddenly. "I've protected her too much, made excuses, smoothed things over. I thought I was being a good sister, but maybe I just enabled her selfishness." "You were being kind. That's your nature. Kindness without wisdom can do harm." She scrubbed a plate harder than necessary. "Father's right. Clara needs to understand her actions have consequences. But Luke Baylor, he's not a good man. Ethan, I've heard stories." "What kind of stories?" She glanced toward the door, lowered her voice. "His first wife died young. Fall from a horse, they said, but she was an excellent rider. There were bruises." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Your father won't force her." "No, but Baylor might try other persuasion. He's rich, influential. He could make things difficult for us." They finished the dishes in troubled silence. As Ethan prepared to leave, Abigail touched his arm. "Be careful. If Baylor sees you as competition for Clara." "I'm no competition for anyone." "He doesn't know that. None of them do. You're the only one who hasn't fallen at her feet. That makes you either a challenge or a threat." He covered her hand with his. "I can handle Sam Baylor. I don't want you to have to. I don't want anyone hurt because of our troubles." The worry in her eyes undid him. Without thinking, he reached up, touched her cheek gently. "Abigail, anyone tries to hurt you or yours, they'll go through me first." She leaned into his touch for just a moment, eyes closing. Then she stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "You shouldn't say such things." "Why not?" "Because I might start believing them, and hope is a dangerous thing for someone like me. Someone like you deserves all the hope in the world." She made a small, broken sound. "Please go, before I say something foolish." He went, but reluctantly, outside. The night was clear and cold. Stars scattered like spilled salt across black velvet. From the bunkhouse came the sound of Pete's harmonica, mournful and sweet. Ethan stood between house and bunkhouse, torn. Every instinct said to go back, to make Abigail understand what was becoming clear to him, that she was what he'd been searching for all those restless years. But she was right. Hope was dangerous. For both of them. In her room, Clara watched from her window as Ethan finally walked away. She'd seen them in the kitchen, seen the way they looked at each other. Rage and humiliation burned in her chest. How dare he prefer Abigail? How dare her plain, worn-out sister capture what Clara couldn't? She'd show them all. If they thought she'd marry Luke Baylor just to solve their problems, they were wrong. She had other plans, and if those plans hurt Abigail in the process, well, her sister should have known better than to reach above her station. Clara began to scheme, and in the darkness, her smile was sharp as glass. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Jake Morrison arrived at breakfast, hat literally in hand, face serious as Ethan had never seen it. "Miss Clara," he said formally, "I've come to speak with your father, and you." Tom set down his coffee. "Go on, Jake." "I want to marry Clara. I know I'm not rich like Baylor, but I've got savings. I can provide for her, and I love her. Have since the first day I saw her." Clara's eyes widened. Of all her admirers, Jake had always seemed the most sincere, the least likely to make such a bold move. "This is rather sudden," Tom said carefully. "Baylor's visit yesterday wasn't exactly subtle." Jake replied. "Figured if I was going to speak, better be now." All eyes turned to Clara. For once, she seemed at a loss for words. I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course." Jake put on his hat. "I'll wait for your answer. Long as it takes." He left with quiet dignity, and breakfast finished in thoughtful silence. Clara excused herself, claiming a headache. Tom headed out to check the herds. Abigail and Ethan were left with the dishes once again. "Jake's a good man," Abigail said. "He'd be kind to her." "That what she wants kindness. I don't know what Clara wants anymore. I'm not sure she does either." They worked quietly, but the air between them hummed with unspoken words. "Finally." Ethan couldn't stand it. "Last night, what you said about hope being dangerous." She stilled, hands in the dishwater. "Yes?" "Maybe dangerous is what we need. Maybe safe and careful hasn't done either of us any favors." "Ethan, please." "I'm not a rich man. Abigail, not particularly handsome or charming. But I'm steady, and I work hard, and I think—" He took a breath. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The plate slipped from her hands, splashing back into the water. She gripped the edge of the sink, knuckles white. "You don't know. I'm used goods. Ethan, a widow with a child and more years than I care to count. You could have someone young and fresh, and—" "I don't want someone young and fresh." He moved closer, not touching but near enough to feel her warmth. "I want someone who knows what life costs and pays it anyway. Someone who finds joy in small things because she's learned not to take them for granted. I want you." She turned then, tears streaming down her face. "Why are you doing this to me?" "Because you need to know. Because I can't watch you disappear into the background one more day. Because when I look at you, I see everything I never knew I was looking for." A sob escaped her. He opened his arms, and she fell into them, burying her face in his chest. He held her carefully, like something precious that might break. "This will cause so much trouble," she whispered. "Let it." "Clara will be furious." "Let her." "The town will gossip." "Let them." She pulled back to look at him, eyes red but wondering. "You really don't care?" "I care about you, about Jimmy, about building something real. The rest is just noise." She reached up, touched his face like she had to make sure he was real. "I stopped believing in miracles a long time ago." "Then believe in this, in us." He kissed her then, gentle and sure, and felt her melt against him. For a moment, the world narrowed to just this, the woman in his arms, the rightness of it, the feeling of finally coming home. Then the kitchen door slammed open, and Clara stood there, face twisted with fury. "I knew it," she shrieked. "I knew you were sneaking around behind my back." Abigail tried to pull away, but Ethan kept his arm around her. "We weren't sneaking. Clara, just took us a while to find our way. You're supposed to want me, everyone wants me." "No," Ethan said firmly. "I want your sister. I'm going to court her proper, with your father's permission." Clara's face went white, then red. "You'll regret this, both of you. I'll make sure of it." She whirled and ran, leaving them in echoing silence. "Well," Abigail said shakily, "that could have gone better." Despite everything, Ethan found himself smiling. "Could have gone worse, too. Least now it's in the open." "You really mean to court me even after that?" "Especially after that." He kissed her forehead. "But first, I better go talk to your father. Man deserves to hear my intentions straight." "He might shoot you." "Might, but I don't think so. Tom Whelan's a fair man. He wants his daughters happy. Question is whether he can see past Clara's dramatics to what's real." Abigail straightened his collar, the gesture so wifely it made his heart turn over. "Be careful. And Ethan, whatever happens, thank you for seeing me, for making me feel worthy of being seen. You were always worthy, just took the right eyes to notice." He left her there, heading out to find Tom Whelan and have the conversation that would change everything. Behind him, he heard Jimmy whoop with joy. The boy had apparently been listening at the door. "Let Clara rage. Let the town gossip. Let Baylor make his threats." Ethan McKenna had found what he'd been searching for.
and he'd fight the whole territory if needed to keep it. The church social was meant to raise funds for a new bell, but it had become something else entirely. A battleground where the Whelan family drama would play out before the whole town. Word had spread like wildfire about Ethan's intentions toward Abigail, and Clara's response had been to accept Jake Morrison's proposal with great fanfare, announcing she'd marry by Christmas. Now. 2 weeks later. The church grounds buzzed with anticipation. Tables groaned under the weight of donated food. Lanterns strung between trees cast dancing shadows, and the makeshift dance floor waited for the fiddler to begin. But all eyes were on the Whelan family as they arrived. Clara swept in wearing her finest dress, powder blue with real lace. Jake Morrison at her side looking proud as a peacock. She made sure everyone noticed her new engagement ring, modest though it was compared to what Baylor might have offered. Behind them came Tom Whelan, weathered face, carefully neutral. And then, a collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Abigail walked with Ethan McKenna, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She'd done something different with her hair, and her dress, while still simple, was new. A deep burgundy that brought out the warmth in her complexion. But it was her bearing that had changed most. Where once she'd hunched, trying to disappear. Now she walked straight and sure.
Shameless, someone whispered. Stealing her sister's beau.
Weren't never Clara's beau, another voice countered. Man made his choice clear enough. Ethan felt Abigail's hand tighten on his arm. Steady, he murmured. We knew this would happen.
Knowing and living it are different things, she replied, but her chin stayed high.
They made their way to where the food tables were set up, Abigail automatically checking that her contribution 2 apple pies and a chocolate cake had arrived safely. The church ladies who usually chatted with her seemed uncertain now, offering tight smiles and turning away quickly. Mrs. Ross, the minister's wife, Mrs. Davidson, finally approached.
How unexpected to see you here with Mr. McKenna.
Nothing unexpected about it, Ethan said calmly. I'm courting Mrs. Ross, with her father's blessing.
Mrs.
Davidson's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. Indeed, how modern. Jimmy appeared at his mother's side, dressed in his Sunday best but already showing signs of rough play with the other boys. Mama, can I get some pie?
After supper, Abigail said automatically. And what have you done to your collar?
As she straightened his clothes, Ethan noticed how the other children watched. Some whispered behind their hands, already parroting their parents' gossip. His jaw tightened. Mr. McKenna. A friendly voice broke through the tension. Ben Rodriguez approached with his wife Maria. Good to see you both. Maria, a sensible woman who'd never had patience for Clara's dramatics, smiled warmly at Abigail. That dress is lovely on you. The color suits.
Thank you,
Abigail said, genuine warmth in her voice.
Maria, your tamales smell wonderful. I made extra, knowing how Jimmy loves them.
Maria winked at the boy, who grinned back. At least not everyone would shun them. Ethan thought good people recognized other good people, regardless of gossip. The fiddler started tuning up, and couples began forming for the first dance. Tradition dictated that engaged couples lead off, which meant Clara and Jake would have the floor first. Clara made the most of it, sweeping past where Ethan and Abigail stood, her smile bright and brittle as glass.
Sister dear, she said sweetly, how nice that you found someone too, even if you had to settle for my leftovers.
Clara, Abigail said quietly.
Please, not here. Oh, I'm just making conversation. After all, we should be happy for each other. Shouldn't we, you getting a man at your age, and me getting the pick of the county?
Jake Morrison had the grace to look uncomfortable. Clara, maybe we should...
Dance. Yes, let's...
She pulled him onto the floor.
leaving a wake of whispers. "She's trying to provoke you," Ethan said. "Both of us." "I know. Doesn't make it easier." The dancing began. Clara and Jake leading with several other engaged couples. Clara made sure to laugh loudly, toss her hair, play up every movement. But Ethan noticed Jake's expression growing more strained as the evening wore on. After the engaged couples, the floor opened to everyone. Ethan turned to Abigail. "May I have this dance?" "People will talk more." "Let them. I want to dance with the woman I'm courting." She took his hand, and he led her onto the floor. The whispers increased, but once they began moving to the music, Ethan forgot about their audience. Abigail danced like she did everything else, with quiet competence and natural grace. She'd probably learned young and never forgotten, though likely hadn't had much chance to practice in recent years. "You're smiling," she said. "I must be because I'm dancing with the prettiest woman here." "Ethan, you don't have to." "I'm not. You are pretty in ways that matter, in the way you care for everyone around you, in your strength, in how you're facing down this whole town's judgment for a chance at happiness." Her eyes grew bright. "You make me feel brave." "You were always brave. You just needed someone to see it." They danced through 2 more songs before a disturbance near the food tables caught their attention. Raised voices. A crowd gathering. Ethan guided Abigail off the floor, and they pushed through to find Clara at the center of the commotion. Jake trying to calm her. "And she's always been jealous," Clara was saying, voice pitched high with hysteria. "Ever since we were girls, she couldn't stand that I was prettier, that men noticed me, so she waited and schemed and stole the one man who didn't fall at my feet." "Clara, that's enough." Tom Whelan's voice cut through like a blade. "You're making a spectacle of yourself." "I'm making a spectacle." Clara whirled to face her father. "What about her carrying on with a man half the town wanted for me? It's shameful." "What's shameful?" Tom said steadily. "Is a grown woman throwing a tantrum like a child. Jake, take her home." "I'm not going anywhere." Clara stamped her foot. Actually stamped it like a toddler. "Not until everyone knows what she did." "What did I do?" "Clara." Abigail stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "Fall in love with a man who saw me as more than an unpaid servant. Accept the courtship of someone who values me for myself, not as a trophy to be won." The crowd murmured, surprised by this show of spine from quiet Abigail Ross. Clara's face went ugly. "You think you're in love? He's using you. Men like him, drifters with no roots. They find desperate women like you and—" The crack of Ethan's voice cut her off. "Enough!" He didn't shout, but something in his tone made everyone step back. "You can throw your tantrums and spread your poison, but you'll not speak of Abigail that way. Not in my hearing. Or mine." Jimmy pushed through the crowd to stand beside his mother, small as he was. His fists were clenched, chin jutted out defiantly. "My mama's worth 10 of you. Aunt Clara, and everyone knows it, even if they're too scared to say." "Jimmy," Abigail said softly, but her hand on his shoulder was proud. "It's true. Mama, she's mean and selfish, and the only reason men chase her is 'cause she's pretty outside. But pretty outside don't mean nothing if you're ugly inside." From the mouths of babes, Ethan thought, watching Clara's face cycle through shades of red. "How dare you?" she hissed at Jimmy. "You little—" "Clara Whelan," the minister's voice boomed across the churchyard. "That is quite enough. This is a church social, not a saloon brawl. If you cannot conduct yourself with Christian charity, I'll have to ask you to leave." Clara looked around, seeming to realize for the first time that she'd become the spectacle, not Abigail, that the crowd's expressions held more disapproval for her behavior than for her sister's supposed transgression. Even Jake Morrison was looking at her with new eyes, seeing perhaps for the first time what lay beneath the pretty surface. "Fine," she spat. "But don't come crying to me when he leaves you. Abigail, when he rides off to the next town and the next desperate woman. Because men like him always leave."
She flounced away, Jake trailing uncertainly behind. The crowd began to disperse, though the buzz of conversation remained loud. "Well, Mrs." Davidson said into the awkward silence, "I believe the pie auction is starting soon." People grabbed onto the normalcy gratefully, drifting toward where the auction would be held, but not everyone left. Maria Rodriguez squeezed Abigail's hand. "You handled that well." "Did I? I feel like I might be sick." "You stood up for yourself. About time, if you ask me." Others approached, ranchers who respected Ethan's work ethic, women who'd quietly appreciated Abigail's kindness over the years, even some of Clara's former suitors who seemed relieved to be free of the drama. "Never did understand the fuss over that girl." One said, "Pretty enough, sure, but a man wants more than pretty in a wife." The pie auction began, and tradition dictated that men bid on pies made by the ladies, with the winner earning the right to share it with the baker. When Abigail's chocolate cake came up, Ethan wasn't the only bidder. Ben Rodriguez bid, grinning at his wife's mock outrage. Even Shy Pete from the ranch put in a bid. But it was Sam Baylor's son Luke who drove the price up, bidding with a mean smile that had nothing to do with cake. $5, Luke called out, an absurd sum for a cake. $6, Ethan countered. $8. The crowd stirred. This wasn't about dessert anymore. $10, Ethan said calmly. Luke's face flushed. 15. 20. Gasps rippled through the crowd. $20 was near a month's wages for a cowhand. Luke opened his mouth, caught his father's eye, closed it. "She ain't worth it," he muttered, loud enough to be heard. "You're right," Ethan said, loud and clear. "She's worth more than you could ever bid." He collected the cake amid applause and scandal in equal measure, bringing it back to where Abigail stood with tears in her eyes. $20, she whispered. "Ethan, that's too much." "Not for your cake, not for the chance to share it with you." He grinned. "Besides, I've been saving. What else am I going to spend it on?" They found a quiet spot under the trees, Jimmy joining them with his own piece of cake he'd charmed from Maria. For a while, they could almost pretend it was just another social, just another evening under the stars. "That was brave, what you did," Abigail said, standing up to Luke Baylor. "That was nothing. You standing up to Clara, that was brave." "I don't feel brave. I feel tired, like I've been holding my breath for years and can finally exhale." "Then breathe. Abigail, deep as you want. I'll handle anyone who tries to stop you." She leaned against his shoulder, and he felt the trust in that simple gesture. Around them, the social continued. Dancing, laughter, the normal rhythms of community life, but in their small circle under the trees, something precious was growing. "Mr. McKenna," Jimmy said around a mouthful of cake. "You gonna marry my mama?" Jimmy Abigail sat up straight, mortified. "That's the plan," Ethan said seriously. "If she'll have me, and if you approve." The boy considered this. "You'd be my PA then." "Stepfather, but I'd try to be a good one." "Would you teach me to rope and shoot and track?" "All that and more." Jimmy nodded decisively. "Then I approve. Mama needs someone who sees how special she is. And you need us to make you smile more." Out of the mouths of babes indeed. Ethan reached over, ruffled the boy's hair. "You're pretty smart for 8. 9 next month," Jimmy corrected. "Mama, you should say yes before he changes his mind." "He's not going to—" "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan interrupted. "Not without you both. That's a promise." The fiddler struck up another tune, and couples returned to the dance floor. This time, when Ethan led Abigail out, the whispers were less harsh. Some people even smiled. Clara's tantrum had shifted something in the town's perception, showing them perhaps that beauty without kindness was an ugly thing indeed. As they danced, Ethan caught sight of Clara near the church.
Jake Morrison beside her, looking troubled. She was gesturing wildly, probably spinning some tale of persecution. But fewer people gathered to listen now. The spell was breaking. "She'll make trouble," Abigail said, following his gaze. "She doesn't forgive easily. Let her try. We've faced down storms and gossip and Baylor intimidation. What's one spoiled girl against all that?" Abigail smiled, the expression transforming her face. "When you put it that way, it doesn't seem so daunting." "Nothing's daunting when you've got the right partner." They danced until the lanterns burned low, and Jimmy fell asleep on Maria's lap. Tom Whelan approached as they were preparing to leave. "Walk with me a moment, Ethan," he said. They stepped away from the others, Tom's face unreadable in the shadows. "I owe you an apology," the older man said finally. "Should have seen years ago what was happening in my own house, how Clara used her sister, how Abigail never complained. Took an outsider to show me what was right in front of me." "No apology needed, sir." I failed both my daughters in different ways. Spoiled one, neglected the other, but you're good for Abigail. Tonight proved that. She fought for herself for the first time in years. She's good for me, too. Her and Jimmy both." Tom nodded. "When you're ready to make it official, you have my blessing. And Ethan, don't wait too long. Life's short and happiness is rare. Grab it while you can." They shook hands, understanding flowing between them. When Ethan returned to Abigail and Jimmy, she looked at him questioningly. "Everything all right?" "Everything's perfect." He helped sleepy Jimmy to his feet, then offered Abigail his arm. "Ready to go home?" "Yes." She took his arm, leaned close. "Home sounds wonderful." As they walked to the wagon, the stars wheeled overhead, infinite and bright. Behind them, the social wound down, but ahead stretched possibility. Clara could scheme, the town could gossip, but none of it mattered. Ethan McKenna had found his home, not in a place, but in a woman and boy who'd claimed his heart, and he'd defend that home against anything the world might throw at them. The widow no Cowboy wanted let them think that. He knew the truth. She was the only woman worth wanting, and somehow, miraculously, she wanted him too. That was worth more than all the pretty faces and $20 cakes in Wyoming. That was worth everything. The night of the attack came without warning, though later Ethan would recognize the signs he'd missed, the unusual quiet around the ranch that evening, the way the horses had been restless all day, even how Pete had mentioned seeing unfamiliar riders on the North Ridge but thought nothing of it. It was past midnight when the first shot shattered the peace. Ethan jolted awake in the bunkhouse, instinct having him rolling out of bed and reaching for his gun before his mind fully registered what was happening. "Raiders," Ben's voice cut through the confusion. "Everyone up." More gunfire erupted, not random shooting, but targeted volleys meant to keep them pinned down. Ethan pulled on his boots and grabbed his rifle, joining the other hands at the windows. In the moonlight, he could see mounted figures circling the ranch buildings, firing at anything that moved. "How many?" he asked Ben. 8, maybe 10. They hit the barn first, trying to run off the horses. Ethan's blood chilled. This wasn't random. Horse thieves would have been quieter, struck when fewer people were around. This was something else. "Cover me," he said. "I'm going for the house." "That's suicide." But Ethan was already moving. The main house stood 50 yards away, and Abigail and Jimmy were in there. Tom, too. But Ethan knew the older man could handle himself. It was the thought of Abigail facing this alone that drove him into the open. He made it halfway before a rider spotted him. Bullets whined past, kicking up dirt at his feet. Ethan dove behind the water trough, returning fire. His shot caught the rider's horse, sending man and animal tumbling. Using the distraction, he sprinted the remaining distance, crashing through the kitchen door to find Abigail crouched by the window with Tom's shotgun. "Thank God," she breathed. "Jimmy's upstairs with Clara." "You hurt?" No, Daddy's at the front, trying to... Glass exploded inward as more shots peppered the house. Ethan pulled Abigail down, shielding her with his body. "They're not trying to rob us," she said against his chest. "They keep shouting about Clara, about teaching her a lesson." The pieces clicked together in Ethan's mind. Baylor. Had to be. Either him or men he'd hired. The rejection at the social must have been the final straw. "Stay down," he ordered. "I'm going upstairs." "Ethan, I'll bring Jimmy down to the root cellar. You, too." He found the boy huddled in Clara's room, his aunt hysterical with fear. For once, her dramatics were justified. "This is my fault," Clara sobbed. "They said they'd make me sorry. Luke said—" "Later," Ethan cut her off. "Jimmy, come here, son. We're going to the cellar." "I can help fight," the boy said, trying to be brave despite his trembling. "Your job is to protect the women. Can you do that?" Jimmy straightened. "Yes, sir." They made their way back down, Clara clinging to Ethan's arm, whimpering at every gunshot. In the kitchen, Abigail had been joined by Tom, blood running down his face from a graze. "Barn's on fire," Tom reported grimly. "They're trying to burn us out." Through the window, Ethan could see flames licking at the barn roof. If they didn't stop it, they'd lose the horses, the hay, maybe everything. "Get to the cellar," he ordered. "All of you. I'm not hiding while my ranch burns." Tom growled. "You're bleeding and they want Clara. Getting her out of sight might make them think twice. Go." For once, Abigail didn't argue about being protected. She grabbed Clara with one hand and Jimmy with the other, herding them toward the cellar. Tom followed reluctantly, still clutching his rifle. Ethan made it back to the bunkhouse in time to help organize a defense. Ben had the men positioned well, keeping up steady fire to hold the raiders back. But the barn was fully ablaze now, and sparks were drifting toward the house. "We need to get to that fire," Ben said. "It's what they want. Draw us out in the open." A new voice rose above the gunfire. Luke Baylor's, drunk and mean. "Send out the girl Clara Wheel in time to pay for making fools of us." "That tears it," Pete muttered. Baylor's boys lost his mind. Ethan thought fast. They were outnumbered but had better cover. The raiders were mounted, which gave them mobility but made them bigger targets. And Luke's shouting gave away that he was drunk, which meant his men might be too. "Pete, take 2 men out the back. Circle wide. Come at them from the north. Rest of us will keep them focused here." It was a desperate plan, but better than watching everything burn. Pete nodded and slipped away with 2 others. The firefight intensified. Ethan picked his shots carefully, making each one count. A raider went down, then another, but the barn was beyond saving now, and embers were landing on the house roof. Then he heard it, a scream from the direction of the root cellar. Not Clara's theatrical shriek, but Abigail's voice, sharp with real fear. He ran without thinking, leaving cover, racing toward the sound. 2 raiders had found the cellar entrance and were trying to force it open. Tom was down, clutching his shoulder. One raider had Abigail by the hair, dragging her up the steps while she fought like a wildcat. Ethan's vision went red. His first shot took the man holding Abigail, spinning him away. The second raider turned, raising his gun, but Abigail grabbed a shovel and swung it with all her strength. The man crumpled. "Get back inside," Ethan ordered, helping Tom to his feet. But Abigail had picked up the fallen raider's gun, her face set with determination. "Jimmy's down there with Clara. I'm not leaving you out here alone." Before he could argue, she was firing at another raider who'd come around the corner. Her shot went wide but made the man dive for cover. Together they fought their way back to better positions, Tom leaning heavily on Ethan, Abigail covering their retreat with surprising steadiness. She might not be a marksman, but she was brave enough to stand her ground. The tide turned when Pete's group hit the raiders from behind. Caught in crossfire, Luke Baylor's liquid courage evaporated. He screamed for retreat,
spurring his horse away. His men followed, leaving their dead and wounded behind. As sudden as it began, it was over. The barn still burned, but men were already forming bucket brigades. The house had caught but might be saved. And somehow, miraculously, none of the defenders were seriously hurt beyond Tom's shoulder wound and various cuts and bruises. Ethan found Abigail sitting on the porch steps, the borrowed gun across her lap, staring at nothing. He sat beside her, gently taking the weapon away. "You did good," he said softly. "I shot at a man. Maybe hit him. I don't even know. You protected your family. Nothing wrong in that." She leaned against him, trembling now that the danger was past. "When I heard them trying to get into the cellar, all I could think was they couldn't have Jimmy, not my boy. Mama?" They looked up to find Jimmy in the doorway, Clara hovering behind him. The boy ran to his mother, throwing his arms around her. "You were so brave. Mama, just like in the stories." Abigail held him tight, tears finally coming. "Oh, sweetheart, I was terrified." "But you did it anyway. That's what Mr. McKenna says courage is, being scared but doing what's right anyhow." Over Jimmy's head, Abigail met Ethan's eyes. "Mr. McKenna's pretty smart about such things." Clara stepped forward hesitantly, her perfect composure shattered. "Abigail, this is my fault, all of it. If I hadn't—" "Later, Clara." Abigail's voice was tired. "We're all alive. That's what matters now." The night blurred into frantic activity. Doc Morrison, no relation to Jake, arrived to tend wounds. The sheriff appeared with deputies, taking statements, arresting the wounded raiders. By dawn, the barn was ash and the house bore scars. But they'd survived. Sam Baylor arrived as the sun rose, face like thunder. But when he saw the sheriff's men and heard what his son had done, the bluster drained away. Luke was nowhere to be found, fled to Texas, someone said, rather than face charges. "This wasn't supposed to happen," Baylor kept saying. "Just meant to scare them a little. Make the girls see sense." "Well, congratulations," Tom said, arm in a sling but dignity intact. "You've scared us plenty. Also committed arson, assault, and attempted murder. Hope it was worth it." Baylor left without another word. A broken man. His empire would survive, but his reputation wouldn't. Neither would his relationship with his son. As the morning wore on and the immediate crisis passed, the ranch folk gathered in the damaged kitchen. Abigail, miracle worker that she was, had managed coffee and biscuits despite everything. "We need to talk about what happens next," Tom said heavily. "The barn's gone. House needs major repairs. We lost horses, hay, equipment. Insurance will help, but—" "We could rebuild," Ben suggested. "I'll pitch in." "Or," Clara said quietly, "I could leave." Everyone turned to stare at her. She sat at the table, still in her nightdress and wrapper, looking younger than her years. "This happened because of me, my vanity, my games. People got hurt because I couldn't choose between admirers. Couldn't stand that Abigail had found happiness when I hadn't." She looked at her sister. "I've been terrible to you for years, and last night you risked your life while I cowered in the cellar." "Clara." "No, let me finish. Jake Morrison's a good man. Better than I deserve. If he'll still have me after this, I'll marry him and move to his ranch. You've carried me long enough. Abigail, time I stood on my own feet." It was the most mature thing anyone had heard from Clara. Growth born from trauma, perhaps, but growth nonetheless. "You're my sister," Abigail said simply. "I'll always love you." "I know. That's what makes my behavior worse." Clara managed a watery smile. "But maybe it's not too late to learn to be the kind of person who deserves that love." Tom cleared his throat, emotion thick in his voice. "Well then, if Clara's marrying out and the ranch needs rebuilding," he looked at Ethan. "Might be time to make some other changes too. Been thinking about bringing on a partner."
Someone young enough to help run things. Maybe take over someday. Interested. Ethan straightened. Sir. Don't sir me. You've proven yourself 10 times over. And if you're marrying my daughter, the sensible one, might as well keep it in the family. Daddy, Abigail protested. We haven't even... Woman, that man faced down armed raiders for you. You picked up a gun for him. If that's not love worth marrying for, I don't know what is. Jimmy piped up from where he'd been quietly eating his third biscuit. Does this mean Mr. McKenna's gonna be my PA for real now? If your mother will have me, Ethan said, taking Abigail's hand. I know this isn't the romantic proposal you deserve. Yes. What? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it. She squeezed his hand. Tears and soot still streaking her face, but smiling like sunrise. I don't need romantic. I need real. I need you. He kissed her then, right there in the damaged kitchen with her family watching and Jimmy whooping with joy. It tasted of smoke and tears and promise. Finally. Ben Rodriguez said, Thought we'd have to survive another disaster before you two figured it out. The weeks that followed were hard ones. Insurance battles, rebuilding, the trial of the captured raiders. But there was joy too. Jake Morrison, proving himself worthy, stood by Clara despite everything. Their quiet December wedding was a far cry from the grand affair she'd once imagined. But the bride seemed content. Ethan and Abigail married 2 weeks later, on a crisp January day with snow dusting the mountains. The rebuilt barn served as the venue, decorated with winter greenery and filled with neighbors who'd come to celebrate not just a wedding but a community's survival. Jimmy served as best man, so proud he nearly burst his new suit. Tom gave Abigail away with tears in his eyes, and when the minister pronounced them man and wife, the cheer that went up could be heard clear to town. That night, as Ethan held his wife in their bed, in their room, in their home, he marveled at the journey that had brought him here. What are you thinking? Abigail asked, tracing patterns on his chest. About how I came here looking for a job and found everything I never knew I wanted. Even the outlaws and fires and family drama, especially those, showed me what we're made of, what we can survive together. She rose up to kiss him. I love you, Ethan McKenna. And I love you, Abigail McKenna. From down the hall came Jimmy's voice. Are you going to give me brothers and sisters now? They laughed against each other's lips, joy bubbling up like spring water. Go to sleep, Jimmy, they called in unison. Just asking. The widow no cowboy wanted. How wrong they'd all been. She was wanted, cherished, beloved. Not for her beauty, though Ethan found her beautiful. Not for her youth, though her spirit was younger than Clara's had ever been. But for her strength, her kindness, her courage, her heart. And as winter gave way to spring on the Whelan Ranch, now the Whelan McKenna Ranch, new life sprouted from the ashes. The barn rose stronger, the house bore its scars with pride, and in the kitchen where so much had happened, Abigail McKenna hummed as she cooked, her husband and son at the table, another child growing beneath her heart. The widow no cowboy wanted had become the wife every wise man envied, and Ethan McKenna, drifter turned rancher, had found his home at last. The decision to leave Dry Creek didn't come suddenly, but built like a river rising with spring melt. Each small incident added to the flow until Ethan and Abigail could no longer ignore the current pulling them towards something new. It started with the whispers that wouldn't die, even after the wedding, even after the town had seen them stand together against raiders. Some folks couldn't let go of the scandal. Abigail would enter the general store to find conversations stopping mid-sentence. Ethan would hear the murmurs when he brought cattle to market, how he'd settled for the plain sister, how she'd trapped him somehow. Let them talk, Abigail said one evening as they sat on their porch, watching Jimmy practice roping fence posts. Her hand rested on her growing belly. The baby due in just 2 months. We know the truth. But Ethan saw how the constant judgment wore on her. The way her shoulders would tighten when they went to town. How she'd grown quieter at church socials. She bore it with grace. As she bore everything, but he hated that she had to bear it at all. The situation with Tom added another layer of complexity. Her father's health had declined sharply after the raid. His wounded shoulder never healing quite right. His energy flagging. He'd legally made Ethan his partner, but everyone knew Tom Whelan's days of active ranching were numbered. "I won't last another winter," Tom said bluntly one morning, watching Ethan and Ben work with the horses. "Oh, don't look at me like that. Man knows when his time's coming. Question is, what happens to this place when I'm gone?" "It stays in the family," Ethan said firmly. "Abigail's home." "Is wherever you are, son. Don't mistake my meaning. This ranch is yours and hers, legal and proper. But is it what you want to spend your life in a place where half the people resent you for not choosing the pretty daughter?" Clara had written from Jake's ranch, happy in her new life, but admitting she still heard ugly gossip when she came to town. Even her genuine transformation couldn't erase years of drama, and the shadow of it fell on Abigail and Ethan. Then came the letter that changed everything. Ethan had written to his brothers back in Missouri, sharing news of his marriage, Jimmy, the coming baby. He hadn't expected more than congratulations, but what arrived was an offer. "California," Abigail read aloud, sitting at the kitchen table. "Your brother says there's good land available near Sacramento. He's established there, running freight between the mining camps and the city." She looked up. "He's offering to help us get started." "It's just a thought," Ethan said quickly. "We have the ranch here." "Do we?" Abigail set down the letter. "Or do we have my father's ranch that we're caretaking? This will always be the Whelan place to folks here. You'll always be the drifter who took the widow. I'll always be the sister who wasn't pretty enough to win you fairly." "Abigail." "I'm not bitter, Ethan, just realistic. We've built something beautiful together, but we've built it in soil that's poisoned by old stories." She touched her belly. "What about our children? Do we want them growing up as the kids of that scandal?" He moved behind her chair, wrapping his arms around her. "What do you want truth now?" She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. "Then, I want to go somewhere we can be just us. Not Clara's sister or Tom Whelan's daughter or the widow no one wanted. Just Abigail McKenna, wife and mother. Is that selfish?" "No, it's human." Jimmy burst through the door then, full of excitement about a new calf, and they tabled the discussion. But the seed was planted. Over the following weeks, they danced around the topic, neither wanting to be the first to say it out loud. It was Tom who finally forced the issue. "You're thinking of leaving." It wasn't a question. They were sitting in his room where he spent most of his time now, looking out at the land he'd spent his life building. "Nothing's decided," Abigail said. "Good. Then let me help decide it. Go." "Daddy, hear me out, girl. This land's been good to me, but it holds too much pain for you. Your mother's grave, your first husband's, all those years of being overlooked. Now this mess with Clara and the raid and the gossip." He coughed, a harsh sound that had been getting worse. "Ben Rodriguez is a good man. I've been thinking of offering to sell him my share of the ranch. He'd be a good partner for you." "Ethan, if you stayed." Or, he paused, or he could buy you out too, give you stake money for California." "This is your life's work," Ethan protested. "No, my life's work is sitting right there." He pointed at Abigail. "Her and Clara, though I made a mess of raising them. The land's just land, but she's my legacy. I want to see her happy before I go, happy and free." Abigail was crying silently, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I don't want to leave you." "I'll be leaving you soon enough, one way or another. Rather see you go to something than watch you stay for nothing but duty." That night, Ethan found Abigail in what had become her favorite spot, the kitchen where they'd first worked side by side. She was kneading bread, working out her emotions through her hands. "Talk to me," he said. "I'm scared." The admission came out small. "I've never been more than 50 miles from this spot. Never been anywhere they didn't know my story before I walked in the door. What if we get to California and it's worse?" "It won't be." "You can't know that." "I can—" He stilled her hands, flour-dusted and strong. "Because in California, you'll walk in as my wife, as Jimmy's mother, as whoever you decide to be. No preconceptions, no history, no shadows, just possibilities. What about you? You just found a home here, partnership in the ranch, respect from the other ranchers. None of it matters if you're unhappy. Home isn't a place. Abigail, it's people. You and Jimmy and this little one." He touched her belly. "Maybe a dozen more if you're willing." That startled a laugh from her. "A dozen? Why not? We'll have all that California sunshine to raise them in." She leaned into him, and he felt the moment she decided. The tension that had lived in her shoulders for months finally eased. "When?" she asked. "After the baby comes. Give us time to prepare. Sell our share to Ben. Get affairs in order. Tom's right, Ben's a good man. The ranch will be in good hands." Word of their decision spread as such things do in small towns. Reactions were mixed. Some seemed relieved, the troublemakers leaving, taking their scandal with them. Others were genuinely sorry to see them go. Maria Rodriguez cried openly when Abigail told her. "But you're the only real friend I have here," Maria said. "The only one who doesn't gossip or judge." "Then maybe it's time you became that person for someone else," Abigail said gently. "Break the cycle." Jake Morrison brought Clara to visit, her own pregnancy just beginning to show. The sisters' relationship had mended considerably, built on a foundation of honesty that had never existed before. "I wish you could stay," Clara said. "But I understand why you can't. I poisoned the well here with my behavior. It's not fair that you're paying for it, but—" She spread her hands helplessly. "We all make choices," Abigail said. "You've chosen to grow. We're choosing to grow somewhere else." "Will you write?" "Of course." They embraced, and Ethan saw Clara whisper something in her sister's ear that made Abigail pull back in surprise, then hug her tighter. The baby came early, as if eager to be part of the journey. Sarah McKenna entered the world during a spring thunderstorm, her cries mixing with the thunder as she announced her arrival. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn chin, and Jimmy declared her the best sister ever, within minutes of meeting her. Tom held his granddaughter once, his fading eyes bright with joy. "She's beautiful, like her mother." "Daddy!" "I mean it. You were always beautiful, Abigail. Just took the right eyes to see it." He looked at Ethan. "Take care of them. With my life." Tom Whelan died 2 weeks later, quietly, in his sleep. The funeral drew most of the county, testament to the respect he'd earned over decades. Abigail grieved, but also seemed released. The last tie holding her to Dry Creek gently severed. They spent another month settling affairs. Ben Rodriguez bought their share of the ranch at a fair price, promising to keep the Whelan name on the brand in Tom's honor. The house was packed, belongings sorted into keep and leave behind. "It's strange," Abigail said the night before departure, walking through the empty rooms. "I thought I'd feel sadder. And I feel light, like I've been carrying rocks in my pockets for years and finally emptied them out." She paused in the kitchen doorway. "This is where you first really saw me, where we washed dishes and talked and fell in love." Ethan finished. "But we're taking that with us. The love, not the room." Jimmy raced through, playing some imaginary game. Baby Sarah asleep upstairs. Tomorrow they'd load the wagon, join a larger train headed west. Safety in numbers, though the routes were more settled now than in earlier years. That last morning dawned clear and bright. The wagon stood loaded, oxen in their traces. Jimmy bounced with excitement while Abigail took a last walk through her garden, cutting flowers for her father's grave. At the cemetery, she laid the bouquet gently on the fresh-turned earth, We're going now, Daddy, but we'll carry you with us. Thank you for seeing what I couldn't, for giving us your blessing. Clara and Jake came to see them off, along with the Rodriguezes and a handful of others. Even the minister came, pressing a traveling Bible into Abigail's hands. For the journey, he said, may it be blessed. As they pulled away, Ethan watched Abigail in the wagon seat beside him. Sarah slept in a basket at her feet. Jimmy rode his pony alongside, proud as any knight. His wife, his beautiful, courageous wife, sat straight and tall, eyes forward rather than back. Any regrets? He asked as Dry Creek fell away behind them. No. She slipped her hand into his. I was the widow no cowboy wanted, but that woman's gone now. I'm Abigail McKenna, heading west with my family to build something new. And I'm the luckiest man alive. She smiled, that transforming expression that still caught him by surprise. We both are lucky. I mean, we found each other against all odds. The rest is just scenery. The wagon rolled on, wheels creaking a rhythm as old as America itself. Behind them lay a past that no longer defined them. Ahead waited California gold, not in the streams, but in the chance to write their own story. Jimmy cantered back to ride beside them. "Mapa, look how far we can see." And it was true. The horizon stretched endlessly, full of promise, empty of the shadows that had haunted them. Somewhere out there was a piece of land that would know them only as the McKennas, hard-working folk with 2 children and love enough to build a life on. The widow no cowboy wanted was gone. In her place rode a woman who'd found her worth, her voice, her heart's true home. And beside her, no longer drifting, sat a man who discovered that the greatest adventure wasn't in the traveling, but in the arriving, at love, at family, at the future they'd build together. As the sun climbed higher, warming their faces and lighting their way, Abigail began to hum. It was an old hymn, one about journeys and faith and new beginnings. Ethan picked up the melody, his rough voice joining hers. Even baby Sarah seemed to coo along, and Jimmy's young voice soared above them all. They sang their way toward California, toward hope, toward home. The wagon train captain later said he'd never seen a family look happier to be heading into the unknown. But then, it wasn't unknown to them. It was simply the next chapter in a love story that had begun with rejection and blossomed into something neither of them had dared dream. The best stories, after all, were the ones that surprised even their authors. And as the territory of Wyoming faded behind them, both Ethan and Abigail knew their story was just beginning. The morning sun painted the California valley in shades of gold and green as their wagon crested the final hill. After 2 months on the trail, 2 months of dust and rain, river crossings and mountain passes, Sarah's first smiles and Jimmy's endless questions, they had arrived. There it is, Ethan said quietly, pointing to a cluster of buildings nestled between rolling hills. Sacramento Valley, and somewhere down there, our new beginning. Abigail shifted Sarah to her other arm, shading her eyes with her free hand. The land spread before them like a promise orchard's heavy with fruit, fields of grain rippling in the breeze, distant mountains standing guard. It looked nothing like the harsh beauty of Wyoming. It looked like hope. "It's so green," Jimmy breathed, his pony dancing with shared excitement. "Greener than home ever was." Home. The word sat differently now, no longer tied to a place, but to the people in this wagon. Abigail reached for Ethan's hand, squeezing tight. "Ready?" he asked. "I've been ready since the day you walked into Daddy's kitchen," she replied. They descended into their future, wagon wheels singing against the packed earth road. Ethan's brother Joseph met them at the freight office, a bear of a man with the same dark eyes but 20 pounds heavier and a smile that split his weathered face. "Little brother, and this must be the famous Abigail who finally tied you down." "Pleased to meet you," Abigail said, suddenly shy. Meeting Ethan's family felt monumental, these people who knew him before, who had no connection to her past. "None of that formality," Joseph boomed, helping her down from the wagon. "Your family now. And this little angel must be Sarah." He peered at the baby, his rough face softening. "She's got the McKenna stubborn chin. Poor thing." "I'm Jimmy," the boy announced, sliding off his pony. "I'm gonna be a rancher like Pa." "Are you now? Well, ranchers need to eat. My Mary's got supper waiting, and she's been cooking for 3 days straight in your honor." The house Joseph led them to was modest but welcoming, with real glass windows and a garden that spoke of a woman's careful tending. Mary McKenna emerged wiping her hands on her apron, round-faced and warm-eyed, enveloping Abigail in a hug before words could be exchanged. "Oh, you poor dear, you must be exhausted. 2 months on the trail with a baby. Come in, come in. There's hot water for washing and food whenever you're ready." The relief of being welcomed, truly welcomed, nearly undid Abigail. These people didn't care about Clara or scandals or who had wanted whom. They saw only their brother's wife, their new sister, a mother who needed rest and care. Over the next days, as they settled into temporary quarters with Joseph and Mary, the shape of their new life began to emerge. Joseph had been right about the opportunities. The valley was booming with agriculture, feeding the ever-hungry mining camps and growing cities. Land was available. Good land, with water rights and rich soil. "This piece here," Joseph said, spreading a map on his kitchen table. 40 acres. Used to be part of a Spanish grant. Owners selling to move back east. House needs work, but the bones are sound. And look, creek access, established orchard, pasture land. Ethan studied the boundaries, the possibilities. "What do you think?" he asked Abigail. She was feeding Sarah, but her eyes were bright with interest. "It sounds perfect, but can we afford it? With what Ben paid for the ranch share and what I've saved, we can manage. Might be tight the first year, but Joseph says he can use me part-time with the freight business until we get established." "The school's only 2 miles away," Mary added. "Good teacher. 2. Jimmy would like her." Jimmy, who'd been playing with Joseph's children in the yard, perked up at mention of school. In Wyoming. Abigail had taught him at home. The idea of a real schoolhouse with other children clearly appealed. They went to see the property the next day. The house sat on a small rise, 2 stories of weathered wood that had seen better days but stood square and true. The orchard spread below, apples and pears, some almond trees, all showing signs of neglect but salvageable. A kitchen garden gone wild with volunteers spoke of good soil waiting to be tended. "Oh," Abigail said softly, turning in a slow circle. "Oh, Ethan." "It needs work," he warned. "Everything worth having does." She walked to where an ancient oak provided shade, its branches perfect for a swing. "Jimmy could climb this. Sarah could nap under it. We could eat Sunday dinners right here, watching the sunset." He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Then we'll take it." Yes, let's take it. Let's make it ours." The purchase was completed within a week. California's loose regulations a stark contrast to Wyoming's formalities. They moved in with little fanfare, their few possessions looking sparse in the empty rooms. But Abigail attacked the house like she'd once attacked the wheel-in kitchen, with purpose and energy that transformed neglect into home. Jimmy started school and came home the first day bursting with news. "There's 12 other kids, and the teacher has books I've never even heard of, and nobody asked about where we came from or nothing." That last part made Abigail's eyes fill. Here, they were just the McKennas. No history, no weight, no judgment. The work was hard. Ethan split his time between the freight runs with Joseph and rehabilitating the orchard. Abigail tended the garden, the house, the children, and somehow found time to put up preserves from the fruit trees that still produced. Neighbors stopped by with welcome gifts and stayed to chat, drawn by her quiet warmth and genuine interest in their lives. "You've got a gift." "Mrs. Patterson from the next farm said, watching Abigail coax life from the neglected garden. "Green thumb and a kind heart. That's a rare combination."
One evening, as autumn painted the valley in rust and gold, Ethan found Abigail on the porch, Sarah sleeping in her arms while Jimmy did homework at her feet. The sun was setting, turning everything warm and honeyed. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling beside her. "I was thinking about names." She said, "What we should call the ranch." "You have an idea?" "New Eden Ranch." She glanced at him. "Too fancy." "Perfect. We did get cast out of our old paradise for tasting forbidden fruit." She laughed, the sound rich and free. "Forbidden fruit, is that what I was?" "The sweetest kind." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. Jimmy abandoned his slate to chase fireflies. Another wonder California offered that Wyoming hadn't. Sarah stirred but settled when Abigail hummed softly. "I got a letter today," Abigail said eventually. "From Clara." Ethan tensed slightly. Letters from Wyoming brought complicated emotions. "She's well. The baby came early but healthy. A boy. They named him Thomas, for Daddy." She paused. "She says the gossip has mostly died down, found new scandals to chew on. She wishes she could visit, see what we've built." "Maybe someday," Ethan said carefully. "Maybe, but not yet. I'm not ready to let Wyoming into California yet." She turned to look at him. "Is that selfish?" "No, it's protective. Nothing wrong with guarding what we've built." Winter in California was a revelation. Rain instead of snow. Green instead of white. The orchard dormant, but not dead. They spent the cooler months planning, dreaming, working side by side to create their vision. Joseph and Mary became regular visitors, their children running wild with Jimmy, filling the house with laughter. Spring brought abundance. The neglected orchard, coaxed back to health, bloomed in clouds of pink and white. The garden exploded with vegetables. And Abigail, standing among her thriving plants, told Ethan she was pregnant again. "Already?" he said, then caught himself at her expression. "I mean, wonderful, perfect, just surprising," she smiled. "Life moves fast when you're happy." He pulled her close, marveling at the woman in his arms. Gone was the shadow who'd served others silently. This Abigail glowed with purpose and joy, her beauty no longer hidden but shining for all to see. The baby, another boy they'd named Daniel, arrived with the autumn harvest. By then, New Eden Ranch had established itself. Their fruit was sought after at markets. Ethan's reputation for honest dealing matching Abigail's for quality preserves. Jimmy had grown 2 inches and gained a best friend at school. Sarah toddled everywhere, chattering in a language only she understood. On their second Christmas in California, they hosted dinner for 15 people. Joseph's family, the Pattersons, the school teacher, a young couple new to the valley. Abigail orchestrated it all with the same quiet competence she'd once reserved for thankless labor. "You've bloomed," Mary McKenna told her as they washed dishes together. "When you first arrived, you were like a plant kept too long in shade. Now look at you." Abigail's hand stilled in the soapy water. Through the window, she could see Ethan teaching Jimmy and the other children to rope. Baby Daniel balanced on his hip, Sarah clapping from her perch on the fence. "I found good soil," she said simply, "and sunshine." Later, as the guests departed and children slept, Ethan and Abigail sat on their porch, wrapped in a quilt against the cool night. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Wyoming." She considered. "I miss Daddy. I miss Maria sometimes. But Wyoming," she shook her head. "That was someone else's life. A woman who believed she was second best, who thought being overlooked was her lot." She turned to face him. "That woman's gone. You helped bury her." "You buried her yourself. I just held the shovel." She laughed, snuggling closer. "Either way, she's gone, and Abigail McKenna likes her life just fine. What about the widow no cowboy wanted miss her?" "Not for a second, though I'm grateful to her." "Why?" Because she waited. Through loneliness and loss and being overlooked, she waited. And because she waited, she was there when the right cowboy finally showed up. Ethan kissed her temple. Smart woman. The smartest. After all, she chose you. They sat in contented silence, listening to night birds and distant coyotes. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched over their journey, their struggles, their triumph. Ethan, thank you for seeing me, for choosing me, for this life. He pulled back to look at her, this woman who'd transformed from shadow to sunshine, from overlooked to cherished. Abigail McKenna, choosing you was the smartest thing I ever did, and I'd do it again every day for the rest of our lives. Promise. Promise. They sealed it with a kiss, there on the porch of the home they'd built together, surrounded by the land they'd coaxed into abundance, filled with children born of love rather than duty. The widow no cowboy wanted had become the wife every wise man envied, and the drifting cowboy had found his anchor. As they headed inside, Abigail paused at the door, looking back at their valley bathed in moonlight. New Eden Ranch spread before them, not perfect, but theirs, built on courage and watered with hope, grown from the ashes of old pain into something beautiful and strong. Coming to bed, Ethan asked from the doorway. In a moment, just memorizing this, all of it. He joined her, understanding. Some moments deserve to be held, treasured, locked away against future storms. No regrets, he asked, as he'd asked on that first day leaving Wyoming. None, she said, as she'd said then. But this time she added, only gratitude, for the journey that brought us here, for the pain that taught us joy's worth, for the people who rejected us, because it freed us to find acceptance elsewhere, even for Clara, because competing with her taught me I was never meant to compete. I was meant to find someone who saw no competition at all. Wise woman, he said again. The wisest, she agreed, finally turning toward their bed, their home, their life. After all, I married you. The door closed on the California night, but their story continued in the orchard that bloomed each spring, in the children who carried their strength and kindness forward, in the love that had transformed two broken people into a whole family. The widow no cowboy wanted that woman existed now only in memory, replaced by Abigail McKenna, beloved wife, devoted mother, successful rancher, living proof that sometimes the best stories begin with rejection and end with abundance. And in their bed that night, as Sarah called out and Ethan rose to tend her, as Daniel stirred and Abigail nursed him back to sleep, as Jimmy mumbled in his dreams down the hall, they were simply what they'd always wanted to be. Not the scandal or the second choice, not the drifter or the overlooked, but a family, complete, content, and home at last. The end. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the Old West. I hope Ethan and Abigail's story touched your heart as much as it touched mine while telling it. If you're listening to this tale, I'd love to know where in the world you're hearing it. Are you driving through Texas plains, sitting in a California valley like our heroes, or perhaps somewhere across the ocean dreaming of the American frontier? Please subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Did Abigail's transformation inspire you? Could you feel the dust of Wyoming and taste the sweetness of those California apples? Your stories and reactions mean the world to us, and they help us know what tales to tell next. Until our next adventure in the Wild West, keep riding toward your own sunset, partners, and remember, sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the words "no one wanted" and end with "everyone envied."